We've noticed that many of you return to our essays each night, seeking a quiet space where your mind can rest. Today we bring you a new journey of thought, woven from psychology and stillness, to accompany you into deep sleep. Tonight, we explore something remarkable, a threshold you cross every single night without knowing its power, a portal, a gateway, the precise moment when your waking consciousness begins to dissolve, when the boundary between who you think you are and who you actually are becomes permeable, translucent, finally passable. Imagine this: you're lying in bed, the day's noise has quieted. Your body begins to release the tension it's been holding since morning. Your breathing deepens. Your thoughts slow down, becoming less linear, more imagistic. You're not quite awake anymore, but you're not yet asleep. You're suspended in that peculiar, in-between state, that liminal space that feels like floating in warm water. Most people rush through this moment. They collapse past it, tumbling into unconsciousness like falling off a cliff. But Carl Jung discovered something extraordinary about this threshold, this hypnagogic gateway, as science would later name it. He found that this brief window, usually lasting only 10 to 20 minutes, holds the power to fundamentally rewire your psyche. Your bedroom, Jung would say, is not just a place to sleep. It becomes a sacred laboratory of transformation. Each night as you settle into your sheets, as the darkness wraps around you, as your mind begins its descent towards sleep, you stand at the edge of the greatest adventure available to human consciousness, the journey into your own depths. This isn't metaphor. This isn't spiritual bypassing or New Age fantasy. Jung spent decades from 1913 to 1930 and beyond deliberately entering this state, documenting what he found there, mapping the terrain of the unconscious with the precision of a cartographer and the courage of an explorer. What he discovered changed not only psychology, but our fundamental understanding of what it means to be human. The paradox he uncovered strikes at the heart of our modern struggle. Transformation doesn't happen through force. It doesn't come from more effort, more willpower, more grind and determination. Transformation happens precisely when we stop trying. It happens in surrender, in darkness. In that moment when your conscious ego, exhausted from the day's performance, finally releases its grip. Sleep itself becomes the ultimate surrender to the self, capital S, as Jung would insist. Not the small self, the ego, the constructed personality you show the world, but the self, that vast intelligence within you that's been trying to speak through your dreams, through your symptoms, through the patterns you keep repeating without understanding why. And here's what our exhausted, overstimulated, modern nervous systems desperately need to understand. We've forgotten that healing happens in darkness. We've been conditioned to fear the night, to distrust stillness, to fill every moment with light and noise and distraction. We treat sleep as downtime, as the unfortunate necessity that interrupts our productivity. Jung's technique offers an antidote to this cultural madness, a way to reclaim the night as what it has always been across human history, the time of visions of renewal, of becoming. During his own Red Book period, those tumultuous years when he broke from Freud and descended into what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, Jung would deliberately enter these nocturnal threshold states. He would lie down, release his conscious control, and allow figures and images and voices to emerge from the depths. He dialogued with them. He drew them. He wrote their messages, and slowly through this practice, he integrated parts of himself he'd never known existed. This essay is your invitation to begin that same journey. Not Jung's journey, yours. We'll explore together the revolutionary understanding of sleep consciousness that Jung developed. We'll trace this practice from the ancient dream temples of Greece, where pilgrims would sleep to receive healing visions, all the way to modern neuroscience laboratories, where researchers measure the theta waves that make this transformation possible. We'll examine the psychological mechanics of how the subconscious actually rewires itself when approached with the right technique. We'll learn about shadow integration, complex dissolution, archetypal access, and neuroplastic rewiring, not as abstract concepts, but as lived experiences that happen in your own consciousness as you approach sleep. And perhaps most importantly, we'll address the truth that no one tells you this work is difficult. It's lonely. It offers no external rewards, no certificates, no social media validation. It requires you to face everything you've been avoiding. But the promise? Oh, the promise is everything. Authentic selfhood, genuine relationships, existential freedom, the capacity to finally live as who you actually are, rather than who you've been told to be. This exploration of psychology for sleep isn't about sleeping better, though that may happen. It's about using sleep's threshold as the portal it has always been, the nightly opportunity to meet yourself, integrate yourself, become yourself. So settle in. Let your body sink deeper into whatever surface holds you. Allow your breathing to find its own rhythm. You don't need to concentrate intensely on these words. In fact, it's better if you don't. Let them wash over you like waves, like the gentle movement of water. If you drift away into sleep before we finish, that's perfect. If you stay present throughout your psyche, we'll be nourished in ways you cannot yet imagine. The night is here. The threshold awaits. And for the next hour, we'll explore together what Carl Jung spent a lifetime understanding, that the most profound transformation available to human beings happens not in daylight's clarity, but in darkness's mystery, not through effort, but through surrender, not while we're awake, but as we release ourselves into sleep. Let us begin. Before we dive into the depths, we must understand with precision what we're talking about. Active imagination. Jung's term for this practice is not meditation. It's not visualization. It's not affirmations or positive thinking, or any of the techniques our self-help culture has diluted into commercial products. Active imagination is something far more radical. It's the deliberate cultivation of a relationship with the autonomous aspects of your psyche. It's the recognition that within you live figures, voices, energies, and intelligences that are not under your ego's control. And the hypnagogic state, that threshold between waking and sleep, is when these aspects become most accessible, most willing to speak, most capable of transformation. Scientifically, the hypnagogic state is defined by the dominance of theta brain waves, oscillating at 4 to 7 cycles per second. Your brain spends most of its waking day in beta waves, alert, focused, analytical. During deep meditation, you might drop into alpha waves, calm, but still conscious. But in the hypnagogic state, you enter theta territory, and this changes everything. In theta, your critical faculty, that inner voice that judges, censors, and controls begins to quiet. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function and rational decision making, starts to power down. Meanwhile, your limbic system, the ancient emotional symbolic part of your brain, comes alive. Images arise not from your conscious intention, but from somewhere deeper. Memories you thought you'd forgotten surface. Emotions you've been suppressing emerge. And beneath it all, the voice of what Jung called the self begins to speak. The distinction from dreaming is crucial. In dreams, you are fully unconscious. Events happen to you. You are swept along by the narrative with no ability to witness or choose. But in the hypnagogic state, you maintain what Jung called the observing ego, a thread of consciousness that can witness what arises without merging completely with it. You're the audience to your own unconscious theater, aware enough to remember, to learn to integrate. Jung's original practice involved lying down in a darkened room, allowing his body to fully relax while maintaining a thread of awareness. He would pose a question to his unconscious, not demanding an answer, but offering an invitation. Then, he would simply witness what emerged. Sometimes it was images, sometimes figures who seemed to have their own personalities, their own agendas. Sometimes it was pure feeling or symbolic movement. He didn't try to control these experiences. He didn't judge them as good or bad, true or false. He engaged them as he would a real person, with respect and curiosity. And through this dialogue over weeks, months, years, he integrated aspects of himself that had been split off, rejected, exiled from consciousness. The temporal window matters. You have approximately 10 to 20 minutes as you're falling asleep when this state is most accessible. Too alert, and your critical mind interferes. Too drowsy, and you slip into unconsciousness before any work can happen. Learning to find and maintain this balance is itself a practice, one that develops over time. Physically, your body must be relaxed but not collapsed. Some tension, just enough to maintain awareness, needs to remain. Psychologically, you must be both engaged and detached, curious but not grasping. It's a paradoxical state, which is why Jung often spoke of it in terms of the conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites. You are both conscious and unconscious, both controlling and surrendering, both active and passive. This is the foundation of psychology for sleep, as Jung understood it, not as escape from consciousness, but as the expansion of consciousness into realms usually hidden from us. The practice transforms sleep from a biological necessity into a psychological opportunity. What Jung discovered wasn't new. It couldn't be. The human psyche has always been the same psyche, operating under the same laws, whether in ancient Greece or modern New York. What changed was our relationship to these laws, our willingness to engage them. In ancient Greece, there existed temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing. These weren't temples where you came to pray and leave. These were places where you came to sleep. The practice was called temple sleep, or incubation, and it was taken with profound seriousness. Pilgrims would purify themselves sometimes, fasting for days before lying down in the temple's inner chamber, to sleep and receive healing dreams. The priests understood something we've forgotten. That consciousness at the threshold of sleep becomes permeable to healing influences that daylight awareness blocks. They created ritual containers for this threshold state, recognizing it as sacred time, sacred space. Aristotle himself wrote observations about this twilight state of consciousness, noting how insights and solutions arise spontaneously when the mind hovers between waking and sleep. The ancient world, we must understand, had a fundamentally different relationship to darkness than we do. They didn't have electric lights to banish the night. They couldn't scroll through their phones until exhaustion forced unconsciousness. They lived in intimate relationship with darkness, with silence, with the liminal states we now avoid. This continued through the medieval period, though transformed by Christian theology. The mystics, St. John of the Cross, Meister Eckhart Teresa of Avila, all spoke of what John called the dark night of the soul. This wasn't depression in our clinical sense, though it included psychological suffering. It was a deliberate descent into interior darkness, a surrendering of the conscious will, a dying to the false self that allows the true self to emerge. The monastic tradition of nocturnal prayer, rising at midnight at 3 a.m. to pray in darkness, recognized something essential about these hours. Not that God was more present at night, but that we are more open. The defenses we maintain during the day dissolve in darkness. The persona we perform for others falls away. We become raw, vulnerable, real. In the Renaissance, this understanding began to shift. Descartes famously had dreams that sparked his entire philosophical revolution, dreams that came in that threshold state between waking and sleep. He was honest enough to acknowledge the source of his insight, even as his philosophy would elevate rational consciousness above all other forms of knowing. The Romantic poets understood. Coleridge wrote Kubla Khan after a hypnagogic vision induced by laudanum. He woke and frantically wrote down what he'd seen in that liminal state before it faded. Whether we approve of his methods or not, the phenomenon is significant. The threshold state accesses creativity and insight unavailable to ordinary waking consciousness. But with the Enlightenment came a cultural shift, a privileging of rational conscious thought over all other modes of knowing. Dreams became just dreams. The unconscious became merely unconscious. The night became time wasted that could be spent productively. We built artificial lights to extend the day-created stimulants to override our natural rhythms, and told ourselves we'd evolved beyond the superstitions of our ancestors. Freud began to challenge this, recognizing that dreams held psychological significance. But even Freud saw the unconscious as primarily reactive, primitive, something to be analyzed and controlled by the conscious ego. Jung broke from Freud precisely on this point. For Jung, the unconscious wasn't a basement of repressed desires. It was a vast landscape of autonomous intelligence, of creativity, of healing power. It didn't need to be controlled. It needed to be engaged, respected, integrated. From 1913 to 1917, Jung entered what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. He had terrifying visions. He saw civilizations destroyed. He met figures who seemed to have their own reality. Philemon, the wise old man. Salome, the anima figure. A serpent, a child, countless others. He didn't dismiss these as hallucinations or fantasies. He dialogued with them. He learned from them. He allowed them to teach him what consciousness alone could never discover. This period nearly destroyed him. He came frighteningly close to psychosis. But he maintained what he called the Archimedean point, that sliver of observing consciousness that could witness without merging, engage without drowning. And through this sustained practice of active imagination, mostly conducted in twilight states, and at the threshold of sleep, he emerged not broken, but transformed, with a map of the psyche that would revolutionize psychology. The historical arc is clear. Human beings have always known about this threshold state's power. We've built temples around it, created rituals for. It recognized it as the time when healing and transformation become possible. Only in the last few centuries have we tried to deny it, dismiss it, medicate it away. Jung's contribution was to reclaim this ancient knowing, to validate it psychologically, and to offer a method that didn't require religious belief or cultural ritual, only honest engagement with your own psyche. When you approach the threshold of sleep with awareness rather than avoidance, 4 fundamental processes become available. These aren't metaphors. They're observable, repeatable psychological phenomena that Jung documented in himself and hundreds of patients over decades of clinical work. First, shadow integration. Your shadow in Jungian terms is everything about yourself that you've rejected, denied, repressed. It's not evil, it's simply unacceptable to your conscious self-image. Maybe it's your anger, which you were taught was bad. Maybe it's your power, which threatened others. Maybe it's your tenderness, which made you vulnerable. Maybe it's your sexuality, your grief, your wild joy, whatever you learned to exile to survive your childhood. During the day, your ego defenses keep this shadow material firmly locked away. You literally cannot see it in yourself, though you see it constantly in others through projection. But at the threshold of sleep, as your defenses relax, the shadow emerges, not to attack you, to integrate, to come home. Research by psychologist Rosalind Cartwright at Rush University demonstrated that dream problem solving works precisely because emotional material can be processed when ego defenses are lowered. Her studies with depressed patients showed that those who engaged dream content rather than avoiding it showed significantly better outcomes. The mechanism is simple. What you can't face in daylight consciousness can be witnessed, metabolized, and integrated in liminal states. One of Jung's patients, a successful CEO, came to him paralyzed by anxiety. In his active imagination practice at the threshold of sleep, he kept encountering a weak, frightened child. His conscious mind wanted to reject this figure. It contradicted everything he believed about himself. But Jung encouraged him to engage the child to listen to what it needed. Over months of practice, the man came to recognize this wasn't his weakness. It was his unmet vulnerability, his unexpressed need for tenderness. Integrating this shadow aspect didn't make him weaker. It made him whole. Second complex dissolution. Jung discovered that we're not one unified psyche, but a collection of semi-autonomous complexes, emotional clusters organized around core wounds or experiences. These complexes have their own energy, their own agendas. They can hijack your consciousness in moments of trigger or stress. You know you have complexes when you overreact to something small, when you repeat a pattern despite consciously not wanting to, when you feel possessed by emotions that seem disproportionate to the situation. These aren't character flaws. They're unintegrated parts of your psyche trying to get your attention. At the threshold of sleep, these complexes can reveal themselves symbolically. You might see them as figures, as places, as recurring imagery. And because you're in that liminal state, aware but not defensive, You can engage them without the overwhelming emotional charge that blocks integration during wakened life. Jung observed that the symbolic representation bypasses your conscious defenses. Your rational mind can't argue with a symbol the way it argues with an insight. The complex presents itself in the language of the unconscious. Images, feelings, bodily sensations, and in that presentation, something shifts. The emotional charge begins to release. The pattern starts to loosen its grip. A woman Jung worked with kept encountering in her twilight visions a locked room she was terrified to enter. Session after session, she would approach the door and retreat. Jung didn't push. He trusted the psyche's timing. After months, she finally opened the door in her active imagination. Inside was her rage, decades of unexpressed anger at her father's abandonment. The moment she could witness it, name it, acknowledge it, the complex that had driven her relationship patterns for 40 years began to dissolve. Third, archetypal access. This is where Jung's work becomes most misunderstood and most profound. The collective unconscious he proposed isn't just a metaphor. It's the deep structure of the human psyche shared across all cultures and times. Within it live what he called archetypes, universal patterns of human experience. The mother, the father, the hero, the wise old man, the trickster, the shadow, the anima and animus. These aren't concepts, they're living energies within the psyche, organizing principles that shape how we experience reality. In ordinary waking consciousness, archetypal energy is too vast, too powerful to access directly. But at the threshold of sleep, as your personal ego boundaries soften, you can encounter these transpersonal forces, not intellectually, experientially. And in that encounter, something larger than your personal story becomes available. Jung described this as connecting to the 2-million-year-old man within, the ancient human wisdom that knows things your conscious mind has forgotten. This isn't past life regression or mystical fantasy. It's the recognition that your psyche didn't start with your birth. You carry within you the accumulated wisdom of every human who has ever lived, loved, suffered, and died. At the threshold of sleep, this wisdom can speak. You might encounter a wise old woman who offers guidance your conscious mind couldn't access. You might feel yourself as part of a vast human story that extends far beyond your individual life. You might recognize that what you're going through, this struggle, this suffering, this question, humans have always been going through. You're not alone in your experience. You're participating in patterns as old as consciousness itself. Fourth, neuroplastic rewiring. This is where ancient wisdom meets modern neuroscience. Your brain is not fixed. It's constantly rewiring itself based on experience, a property called neuroplasticity. And one of the times it's most plastic, most open to change is at the threshold of sleep. Research by Karim Nader and Oliver Hart demonstrated the phenomenon of memory reconsolidation. When you recall a memory, it becomes temporarily unstable plastic. You have a window about 6 hours where that memory can be updated with new information. Then it reconsolidates in its new form. The hypnagogic state creates optimal conditions for this reconsolidation. Your critical faculty is offline, so you're not defending against new information. Your brain is in theta waves, which are associated with heightened suggestibility and learning. And you're accessing unconscious material that's normally hidden from your waking awareness. This means that affirmations, intentions, and psychological work done at the threshold of sleep aren't just symbolically powerful, they're neurologically effective in ways that the same practices during the day cannot match. You're literally rewiring your brain's default patterns. And this is crucial. This isn't about positive thinking or manifestation. It's not about denying your reality or spiritually bypassing your pain. The rewiring happens through integration, not denial. Through facing what you've been avoiding, not affirming it away. Through descent into your depths, not escape into fantasy. Jung observed this process over and over. Patients who did this work consistently every night entering the threshold state with awareness and engaging what arose there showed profound transformation over time. Not overnight, not after a weekend workshop, but through sustained practice, they rewired patterns that had seemed immutable. They integrated splits into psyche that had caused decades of suffering. They became slowly and sometimes painfully more whole. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are, not who you wish you were, not who you've been told to be, but who you actually are, beneath all the conditioning, all the trauma, all the adaptation. And the fastest route to that becoming is through the nightly practice of conscious engagement with the threshold of sleep, this portal into the depths that most people rush past in their haste to escape consciousness. This is the foundation of psychology for sleep as a transformative practice. The mechanics are clear, the processes are observable, the results for those willing to do the work are revolutionary. But understanding the mechanics isn't enough. To truly grasp the power of this practice, we must explore how it echoes through the deepest patterns of human mythology and culture. We must see how every hero's journey, every spiritual tradition, every wisdom teaching has always known. What Jung rediscovered, that transformation requires descent. That healing happens in darkness, that who you are cannot be found in light, but must be retrieved from the underworld. Let us descend together into that exploration. There is a story the human soul has been telling itself since before we had written language. It appears in every culture, in every era, in mythology and religion and literature, and now in film. Jung called it the descent archetype, and once you recognize it, you see it everywhere because you're living it. We all are. The pattern is simple. A hero must descend into the underworld, into darkness, into death itself, before they can return, transformed with the treasure that the daylight world needs. No descent, no transformation, no death, no rebirth, no darkness, no light. What Jung understood, what makes his work so radical, is that this isn't just a story. It's the fundamental structure of psychological transformation. And every night as you approach sleep, you have the opportunity to enact this pattern. Every night you stand at the threshold of your own underworld. Sleep itself is a small death. Your ego dissolves. Your identity loosens. Your conscious control releases. If you've ever noticed how you sometimes jerk awake just as you're falling asleep, that's your ego's last desperate attempt to maintain control to avoid the dissolution. It's terrified of what it perceives as death. But what the ego calls death, the self calls transformation. What consciousness fears the unconscious knows as necessary. The descent isn't punishment, it's the path. And the threshold of sleep is where that path opens every single night. The collective unconscious Jung proposed contains these archetypal patterns as living structures. They're not learned, they're inherited. A child who's never heard the story of the hero's journey will dream it anyway. A person from a culture with no underworld mythology will still experience descent dreams when transformation is needed. These patterns exist within the psyche itself, as fundamental as the structure of your skeleton. At the threshold of sleep, access to these archetypal patterns increases dramatically. Your personal story, the specific details of your life, your problems, your circumstances, begins to connect to these deeper patterns. You're not just a person struggling with a difficult relationship. You're Persephone being pulled into the underworld. You're not just someone facing a midlife crisis. You're the hero answering the call to adventure. This isn't metaphor making you feel better about your problems. This is recognition that your problems are expressions of timeless human patterns. You're not alone in what you're experiencing. You're participating in something as old as consciousness itself. And in the liminal state between waking and sleep, you can access the wisdom these patterns contain. Not as intellectual knowledge, but as lived experience. The archetypal realm becomes available not to your thinking mind, but to your experiencing self. In Greek mythology, Persephone was the maiden goddess of spring, daughter of Demeter, gathering flowers in a meadow when the earth split open and Hades, lord of the underworld, pulled her down into his realm. It seems like a story of victimization, of trauma, of violation. And it is. But it's also more. Persephone doesn't just endure the underworld, she becomes its queen. She eats the pomegranate seeds, which binds her to return. In later versions of the myth, she chooses this. She recognizes that she cannot remain forever in the upper world in light and innocence and spring. Something in her belongs to the depths, to darkness, to the realm of the dead. The psychological teaching is profound. Consciousness must marry the unconscious. Your daylight self must descend to meet your shadow, your depth, everything you've kept hidden. And this descent isn't a violation of who you are, it's the becoming of who you are. Jung observed that his patients often experienced involuntary descents, what we now call depression, though that word doesn't capture the archetypal dimension. Something would pull them down against their will. Their normal life would stop working. The things that used to bring joy would go gray. They would feel dragged into an underworld they didn't choose. And the therapeutic question wasn't, how do we get you back to normal? It was, what is the underworld trying to teach you? What needs to die so something truer can be born? For women especially, Jung noticed the Persephone pattern emerging. The cultural demand to remain in spring, youthful light pleasing, available, denied the necessity of descent. But the psyche knows you cannot stay in spring forever. Transformation requires darkness. Depth requires descent. Becoming yourself requires time in the underworld. At the threshold of sleep, the Persephone story isn't just something you think about. It becomes something you experience. You feel the pull downward. You sense the resistance in your consciousness, the part of you that wants to stay in control, in light, in the known world. And you also feel something else, the recognition that what's pulling you down isn't your enemy, but your soul's necessity. The 6 months in the underworld, 6 months in the upper world, this is the rhythm of transformation. You can't stay in either realm exclusively. You must learn to move between them. And the threshold of sleep is where that movement happens nightly. Each evening you descend. Each morning you return. And what you bring back from the darkness enriches your daylight life. Modern relevance. Our culture treats depression as malfunction, something to medicate away as quickly as possible. Sometimes medication is necessary. Jung wasn't anti-medicine, but what if some depressions are involuntary descents? Persephone being pulled into her necessary underworld. What if the question isn't, how do we escape this darkness? But, what does this darkness have to teach us? This isn't romanticizing suffering. It's recognizing that some suffering is purposeful, archetypal, transformative. And the practice of conscious engagement with the threshold of sleep offers a way to work with that descent, rather than just enduring it. You learn to go down willingly, to meet what's there, to integrate what the darkness reveals. Jesus told a story about a young man who demanded his inheritance early, left his father's house, and went to a far country. There he squandered everything on reckless living. He ended up so desperate that he took a job feeding pigs for a Jewish audience, the ultimate degradation. And it was there, in that absolute low point, that the text says, he came to himself. He came to himself, not when he was successful and rich, not in his father's house being the good son, but when he'd lost everything, when he was utterly broken, when his ego strategies had completely failed. That's when he found who he actually was. The far country is the unconscious. It's where you go when you follow your ego's desires away from the self. You think you're seeking freedom, pleasure, independence. You're actually seeking the necessary shattering that will reveal what's real beneath your constructed self. The feeding pigs. This is the ego's degradation. Everything you've used to prop up your sense of worth gets stripped away. Your achievements, your reputation, your self-image. It all turns to dust. This isn't punishment. This is preparation. You must lose your false self before your true self can emerge. Jung worked with many men who lived this pattern. They'd built successful lives according to external standards, good careers, respectable marriages, social standing. And somewhere in their 40s or 50s, it would all start to feel hollow. They'd have what looked like a breakdown, but was actually a breakthrough trying to happen. They'd gone to the far country of ego achievement, and now the psyche was calling them back to the Father's house, to the self. The Father in the parable never leaves. He watches for his son's return. He sees him while he's still far off and runs to meet him. This is Jung's self, the deeper identity that never rejects you, never abandons you, simply waits for you to exhaust your ego strategies and come home. At the threshold of sleep, you can enact this return nightly. Your ego exhausts itself through the day, performing, achieving, managing, controlling. As you approach sleep, you feel the pull toward the Father's house, toward the self. Your only job is to not resist that pull, to allow the dissolution, to trust that what feels like losing yourself is actually finding yourself. The elder brother in the parable, the one who stayed home, who was always good, who resented his brother's return, represents the ego that never descended. He's bitter because he's never known the joy of return. He's performed righteousness without ever experiencing transformation. He's remained at the Father's house, but never actually came home because he never left. This is the trap of spiritual bypassing, of premature transcendence. Some people claim enlightenment without ever having done the descent work. They remain in the upper room of consciousness, convinced they've arrived bitter toward those still struggling in the depths. But they haven't integrated their shadow. They haven't faced their darkness. They've achieved a spiritual persona, not genuine transformation. The psychology for sleep that Jung teaches requires actual descent, not performed depth, not aesthetic darkness. Real confrontation with everything you've been avoiding, the far country of your unconscious, with all its pigs and degradation and truth. The Sumerian myth of Inanna predates Greek mythology by thousands of years, yet it tells the same essential story with even more precision. Inanna, Queen of Heaven, decides to descend to the underworld, ruled by her sister, Ereshkigal. At each of 7 gates, she must remove a piece of her regalia, her crown, her jewelry, her royal robes, everything that marks her as queen. She arrives in the underworld naked, stripped of all identity markers. Ereshkigal kills her and hangs her corpse on a hook. Inanna stays dead for 3 days. Then through a complex rescue involving small creatures who can empathize with Ereshkigal's suffering, she's brought back to life. But she can't return to the upper world without providing a substitute. She returns to find her husband on her throne, having not mourned her death, and sends him down in her place. The psychological precision here is extraordinary. Every achievement, every identity marker, every external validation, it all must be removed before you can truly descend. You can't bring your ego's defenses into the unconscious. You can't enter your depths while clinging to your surface self-image. Modern interpretation. Think about every role you perform, your job title, your relationship status, your education level, your income bracket, your social media presence, your political identity, your dietary restrictions. Every I am statement you make about yourself, these are your 7 gates. These are what must be removed if you want to access your actual depths. At the threshold of sleep, this stripping happens naturally if you allow it. Who are you without your waking roles? Without your professional identity? Without your carefully curated personality? As consciousness dissolves toward sleep, all these constructed selves start to fall away. If you can stay aware through that process, rather than rushing into unconsciousness, you experience what Inanna experienced, the terror and freedom of being stripped to nothing. The 3 days of darkness, this is the period of gestation of death that becomes birth. You can't resurrect immediately. You must remain in the depths long enough for transformation to occur. Jung's patients who did deep work often reported periods where everything felt meaningless, where old structures had died, but new ones hadn't yet emerged. This wasn't clinical depression requiring immediate intervention. It was archetypal death requiring patience. The return Inanna doesn't come back the same. She's been to the underworld. She's died and been reborn. She has power she didn't have before, not the power of achievement, but the power of someone who's faced death and knows there's nothing to fear anymore. And she has a harsh clarity about what's real and what's performance. Her husband's failure to mourn her reveals the superficiality of their relationship. She can see now with underworld eyes. When you do this work at the threshold of sleep consistently, you develop that same clarity. You can tell the difference between people who've done their depth work and people who are performing depth. You recognize superficiality immediately, and you lose your tolerance for pretense, including your own. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita. In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood, for the straight path was lost. These opening lines of Dante's Divine Comedy describe precisely the state that calls for descent work. You're halfway through your life, the midlife crisis that Jung understood as the beginning of individuation, and suddenly the path you've been following no longer makes sense. You're lost in a dark wood. The standard response in our culture is to panic, to try desperately to get back on track, to double down on the old strategies. But Dante shows us something different. The way out is through. He must descend through all 9 circles of hell before he can begin climbing Mount Purgatory toward paradise. No descent, no ascent, no hell, no heaven. Virgil, the poet who guides Dante through hell, represents what Jung called the psychopomp, the guide between worlds. You cannot descend alone into your unconscious. You need something to maintain connection to consciousness, to prevent you from being swallowed entirely. For Jung's patients, he served this function. For those doing this work independently, the observing ego, that thread of awareness maintained even at sleep's threshold, becomes the guide. The key insight from Dante: the way out is through. You cannot avoid your shadow material, your complexes, your painful truths. You must go through them, face them, integrate them. Every attempt to go around them just keeps you circling in the dark wood. At the threshold of sleep, you can enact Dante's journey nightly, the descent into increasingly deeper levels of the unconscious. The encounters with your personal demons, not as enemies to defeat, but as aspects of yourself to understand. The gradual movement from suffering toward integration, from fragmentation toward wholeness. From 1913 to 1930, Jung kept a journal that he didn't publish in his lifetime. It was finally released as The Red Book in 2009, and it revealed something extraordinary. Jung wasn't just theorizing about the unconscious, he was exploring it himself with the dedication of a scientist and the courage of a mystic. He would enter twilight states, often deliberately at the threshold of sleep, and allow figures to emerge. Philemon appeared an old man, with wings representing the wisdom of the psyche itself. Salome appeared along with the serpent, representing aspects of the anima, a divine child. Various other figures, each autonomous, each with something to teach. Jung didn't dismiss these as fantasies. He dialogued with them. He painted them. He recorded their words. He allowed them to challenge his conscious understanding. Philemon taught him, Jung wrote, that there are things in the psyche which I do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life. This is the core revelation of active imagination. You are not one unified consciousness controlling a passive unconscious. You are a community of autonomous psychological processes, many of which have intelligence, perspective, and agency that your ego cannot access. And the threshold of sleep is when these processes become most communicative, most available for relationship. The technique Jung used: he would lie down, release conscious control, and ask a question, or simply open himself to what wanted to emerge. Sometimes he would write automatically, letting his hand record what arose without censoring or controlling. Sometimes he would paint, or draw the images that appeared. Always he maintained that sliver of observing consciousness, the Archimedean point, that kept him from drowning in the unconscious. The danger was real. Jung came terrifyingly close to psychosis during this period. He experienced visions of civilizations being destroyed, apocalyptic imagery encounters that could easily have overwhelmed his sanity. What saved him was that observing ego, that ability to witness without merging, to engage without being swallowed. Why he almost didn't publish it. The Red Book reveals Jung's psychological and spiritual process in raw, unfiltered form. It shows him vulnerable, confused, struggling. It doesn't present neat theories, but messy experience. He feared it would be misunderstood, used to dismiss his later work as unscientific mysticism. But what it actually reveals is the source material for everything Jung later developed. His theories about the collective unconscious, about archetypes, about the individuation process, they all emerged from this sustained practice of active imagination, at the threshold of consciousness. He wasn't making up theories. He was mapping what he discovered in his own depths. For us, the teaching is clear. Transformation doesn't come from reading about the unconscious. It comes from engaging it directly, repeatedly, courageously. The threshold of sleep offers that opportunity every night. Will you take it? Jung spent years studying medieval alchemy, eventually recognizing it wasn't really about turning lead into gold. It was an elaborate symbolic system for psychological transformation, encoded in the language of chemistry to avoid persecution. Two key phases, nigredo and albedo, the blackening and the whitening, the death and the purification. Nigredo was described as putrefaction, decay, the darkening and dissolution of matter. Psychologically, it's the death of the false self, the ego's dissolution, the experience of meaninglessness that precedes rebirth. The alchemists would say, nothing can be born without first dying. You cannot transform without first allowing what you've been to completely break down. This is why ancient alchemists often worked at night. They understood that darkness facilitated the work. Not metaphorically, actually. The consciousness at night, especially at sleep's threshold, is more amenable to dissolution, to letting go of fixed forms, to becoming fluid and transformable. Albedo. The whitening came after. It was the washing away, the purification, the emergence of something clearer and truer after the nigredo's darkness. Psychologically, it's the clarity that comes after working through your shadow, after integrating what you've been avoiding. The morning awakening after a night of psychological work at the threshold of sleep. The tarot, particularly in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck that Jung influenced, contains these same themes. The Hanged Man card shows a figure suspended upside down by 1 foot, a halo around his head. He's not suffering. He's experiencing illumination through willing surrender. His perspective is reversed. What consciousness sees as suffering, the self sees as necessary. This is the posture of active imagination at sleep's threshold. Willing suspension of your normal orientation, acceptance of reverse perspective. Trust that what feels like hanging is actually transformation. The halo indicates what comes from this surrender, enlightenment, but not through effortful ascent, through descent, through letting go, through allowing consciousness to hang upside down. The death card doesn't mean literal death, but transformation, the ending that makes beginning possible. The skeleton reaps all equally. No achievement, no status, no ego defense can protect you from the transformation your soul requires. But look at the background of the traditional card, Tadi. There's a sunrise. Death is leading toward rebirth. Ending toward beginning. Dissolution toward renewal. Both cards represent the psychology for sleep that Jung teaches transformation through surrender wisdom, through descent, rebirth through death. We must be honest about the danger. Not every descent returns. Not every journey through the underworld ends in resurrection. Some people get lost in the depths and never resurface. This is psychosis, not transformation. This is drowning, not swimming. The difference is the observing ego. Jung maintained it. Dante had Virgil. Persephone remained conscious even as the underworld. But some people lose that thread entirely. They merge with archetypal forces too powerful for individual consciousness to contain. They fragment rather than integrate. Artists throughout history have demonstrated this danger. Van Gogh's descent into madness, Antonin Artaud's schizophrenia, numerous poets, painters, musicians who touched something in the depths that destroyed them rather than transformed them. The Romantic poets cursed too much depth, too little ground. They accessed archetypal realms without adequate ego structure to metabolize what they found there. Their art shows the truth they encountered, but they couldn't survive the encounter themselves. In modern spiritual seeking, we see this constantly. People who start meditation or psychedelic work or trauma therapy without adequate preparation and support. They open doorways they can't close, encounter aspects of psyche they can't integrate, and end up more fragmented than when they started. The integration pathway Jung insists upon. You must maintain the observing ego. You must come back to tell the tale. You must ground what you discover in the depths with concrete action in the daylight world. You must balance descent with ascent darkness, with light unconscious exploration, with conscious responsibility. This is why the threshold of sleep practice is actually safer than many other approaches to the unconscious. You're working with natural processes, the movement towards sleep that happens anyway. You're not forcing doors open with substances or extreme practices. You're simply becoming conscious of a transition that's already happening, engaging with it skillfully, rather than rushing through it. But even so, Jung gives clear warnings about when not to do this work. When ego boundaries are already fragile, active psychosis, severe trauma, when there's no support system, if things get difficult, when you're using it to escape life, rather than engage more deeply with life, when you're romanticizing the unconscious, rather than respecting its power, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. Jung wrote, you become whole by descending into your darkness and bringing back what you find there. But you must be able to descend and return to die and be reborn, to dissolve and reconsolidate. The practice requires both surrender and strength, both letting go and holding on both death and resurrection. The cultural evolution is clear. Ancient people built ritual containers for this work. Temples, ceremonies, initiations. Medieval mystics had monastic structures. Modern people often have nothing. We're trying to do the most dangerous psychological work with the least support. No wonder so many get lost. This is why building your own container matters. A regular practice time, a safe space, perhaps a therapist who understands depth work, definitely a commitment to grounding exercise, nature, creative expression, concrete accomplishment in the world. The descent must be balanced by ascent. The night work must be balanced by day work. The unconscious exploration must be balanced by conscious responsibility. With these safeguards, the practice Jung teaches becomes not dangerous, but transformative. Without them, it can shatter rather than integrate. Respect the power of what you're engaging. Respect the depths you're entering. Respect the forces that move in the liminal spaces of consciousness. But don't let fear prevent you from beginning. The greater danger for most people isn't descending too far. It's never descending at all. It's living your entire life on the surface, never encountering your depths, never becoming who you actually are. That's the real tragedy Jung witnessed. People so defended against their own psyche that they never really lived. The threshold of sleep waits every night. The underworld is always there, ready to receive you, if you're willing to descend. The question isn't whether you'll encounter your darkness. We all do eventually, either through chosen descent or through life, forcing us down. The question is whether you'll approach it consciously, skillfully, with the wisdom Jung offers, or whether you'll resist until the resistance itself becomes your suffering. Choose consciousness. Choose descent. Choose the nightly practice of meeting yourself at the threshold in the dark with courage and curiosity and commitment to becoming whole. While Jung was mapping the psyche's depths from the inside, neuroscience was developing the technology to examine the brain from the outside. For decades, these two approaches, psychological and neurological, existed in separate worlds. But in the last 30 years, something remarkable has happened. They've begun to converge. What Jung discovered through introspection, neuroscience now validates through measurement. The hypnagogic state, scientifically defined, is the transitional consciousness between waking and sleep, characterized primarily by theta wave dominance in the brain. Theta waves oscillate at 4 to 7 cycles per second, slower than the beta waves of normal waking consciousness, slower than the alpha waves of relaxed alertness, but faster than the delta waves of deep sleep. When researchers use polysomnography, the comprehensive sleep study that measures brain waves, eye movements, muscle tension, and more, they can identify this threshold state with precision. It typically lasts 5 to 20 minutes, though individual variation is significant. During this window, something extraordinary happens in your brain's architecture. Let's be specific about what theta wave dominance means. Your brain doesn't switch completely from one frequency to another, like changing radio stations. Rather, the dominant frequency shifts, while others remain present in the background. In theta states, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for executive function, critical thinking, and conscious control, shows decreased activity. Meanwhile, your limbic system, the emotional associative memory processing parts of your brain, shows increased activity. This combination creates a specific psychological state, reduced critical faculty, combined with heightened emotional processing and symbolic thinking. You're not unconscious, but you're not fully conscious either. You're in between, and that in-between state has unique properties that neither full waking nor full sleeping can access. The distinction from other states matters. Meditation typically aims for alpha or high theta states while maintaining conscious awareness and control. Hypnosis involves suggestion from an external source. Dreaming happens during REM sleep when you're fully unconscious. The hypnagogic state is unique. You're conscious enough to witness what arises, but relaxed enough that your defenses have dropped. You're suggestible, but to your own unconscious, rather than to external influence. Research methodology has become increasingly sophisticated. Modern sleep labs use fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, to watch which brain regions activate during the transition to sleep. They use EEG electroencephalography to measure electrical activity across the brain. They combine this with self-report data, asking participants to describe their subjective experience, and with cognitive testing before and after hypnagogic periods. What they're finding validates what Jung intuited: this state has unique therapeutic and creative potential precisely because of its neurological properties. To understand why the threshold of sleep has such transformative power, we need to understand how psychological patterns form in the first place. Developmental psychology, particularly the work of Piaget and Vygotsky, reveals something crucial. Children's brains exist primarily in theta states until around age 7. Watch a young child absorbed in play. Their brain waves look almost identical to an adult in hypnagogic transition. This is why children learn so rapidly, why they're so imaginative, why they can believe impossible things before breakfast. Their critical faculty hasn't developed yet. They're in a constant state of open receptivity to experience. This is also why early childhood experiences shape personality so profoundly. During these theta-dominant years, everything goes in deep. Parental messages, emotional atmospheres, repeated patterns, they all write themselves directly onto the child's psyche, without the filtering that adult consciousness provides. This is why Jung spent so much therapeutic time helping adults revisit childhood experiences. The patterns formed during those theta years require theta states to access and transform. As the prefrontal cortex develops through childhood and adolescence, critical thinking emerges. This is necessary for functioning in the world. You can't go through life believing everything, responding emotionally to everything, having no filter. But something is lost. Access to that open, receptive, deeply programmable state becomes more difficult. The door to the unconscious starts to close. Adolescence presents a second window. Brain imaging studies show massive reorganization during teenage years. Neural connections are pruned, new pathways form identity, consolidate. This is why adolescence is so turbulent. The brain is literally restructuring itself. And sleep needs increase dramatically during this period, often to 9 or more hours per night, because sleep is when much of this reorganization happens. But here's what's crucial for our understanding. Even though you lose constant theta access as you age, the threshold of sleep continues to provide theta windows. Every single night, for those 10 to 20 minutes as you're falling asleep, your brain returns to the state it existed in, constantly during childhood. The door to the unconscious that mostly stays closed during waking hours opens again. This is why Jung's technique works. You're not trying to force your brain into a state it's incapable of. You're working with a natural transition that happens anyway. You're simply becoming conscious of it, staying aware through it, using it skillfully, instead of rushing past it. In adulthood, without intentional practice, theta access decreases further. Neural pathways harden through repeated use for better and worse. Your brain becomes efficient at being you, at running your particular patterns. This efficiency is useful. You don't want to relearn how to brush your teeth every morning, but it makes change increasingly difficult. Jung's concept of individuation, becoming central at midlife, makes neurological sense. By 40 or 50, your brain has spent decades reinforcing particular patterns. You've developed sophisticated defenses, rigid beliefs, automatic responses. Without intervention, these patterns will run for the rest of your life. But the second half of life, what Jung saw as the real psychological journey, requires undoing some of that rigidity, returning to a kind of flexibility. The threshold of sleep offers that flexibility. It's not that theta waves magically reverse decades of neurological patterning in one night, but consistent practice over time entering that state, with awareness, engaging unconscious material, allowing new connections to form, can gradually rewire even deeply established patterns. Studies with older adults show that neuroplasticity doesn't disappear with age, though it does decrease. The brain remains capable of forming new connections, learning new patterns, integrating new information. But it requires the right conditions. And the hypnagogic state provides precisely those conditions: reduced critical faculty, increased openness, heightened suggestibility, access to memory systems that allow reconsolidation. When you enter the threshold of sleep with awareness, specific brain regions show characteristic activation patterns. Understanding these patterns helps clarify why Jung's technique works neurologically. The default mode network, DMN, is a collection of brain regions that activate when you're not focused on the external world. It's responsible for self-referential thinking, autobiographical memory, imagining the future, thinking about others' mental states. During focused external activity, the DMN quiets down. But as you relax towards sleep, it becomes highly active. This increased DMN activity correlates with what Jung called turning inward. You're no longer processing external stimuli, but engaging with internal content, memories, feelings, imagination, identity, questions. The DMN is where you construct your sense of self, where you integrate experiences into your ongoing life narrative. But here's what's fascinating in the hypnagogic state. The DMN is active, but not rigidly controlled. During normal waking consciousness, your prefrontal cortex moderates DMN activity, keeping it organized and realistic. As you approach sleep, that moderation decreases. Your self-referential thinking becomes more fluid, more symbolic, more open to revision. The prefrontal cortex specifically, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, is your brain's executive control center. It's what allows you to plan, to inhibit impulses, to think critically, to maintain focus on goals. It's extraordinarily useful, but it's also what maintains your ego defenses. It's the neurological basis of what Jung called the persona, the constructed self you present to the world. As you approach sleep, prefrontal activity decreases. This isn't brain dysfunction, it's a natural part of the sleep transition. But it has profound psychological implications. With the prefrontal cortex quieting down your capacity for critical judgment, for defensive rationalization, for maintaining ego boundaries, all of this decreases. This is why shadow material can emerge during hypnagogic states. The parts of yourself you normally keep, repressed the memories you usually avoid, the feelings you habitually suppress, they're kept in check during waking hours by prefrontal activity. When that activity decreases, the material resurfaces, not to attack you, but because the neurological barrier preventing its emergence has temporarily lifted. The hippocampus, central to memory formation and consolidation, shows increased activity during sleep transitions. It's literally replaying the day's experiences, deciding what to keep in long-term memory and what to discard. But more importantly, for our purposes, it's making the memories plastic, temporarily open to modification. This is the neurological basis of memory reconsolidation, which we'll explore in more detail shortly. The memories you access during hypnagogic states aren't just being recalled, they're being reopened for editing. And the new context, the new understanding, the new integration you bring to those memories can actually change how they're stored. The amygdala, your brain's fear and emotional processing center, shows distinctive activity patterns during sleep transitions. It remains active. Emotions don't shut off as you fall asleep, but the connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex changes. Normally, your prefrontal cortex can modulate. Emotional responses can tell you that's not really dangerous, or that's an overreaction. With decreased prefrontal activity, emotions arising from the amygdala are experienced more directly, more intensely. This is why some people find the threshold of sleep emotionally intense. Feelings that were successfully managed during the day suddenly feel overwhelming. But this intensity isn't a problem, it's an opportunity. These emotions are carrying information, trying to communicate something your conscious mind has been blocking. In the hypnagogic state, you can feel them without being able to rationalize them away, which paradoxically allows them to be processed and integrated rather than just managed. The thalamus acts as a sensory relay station, deciding what external stimuli reach conscious awareness. During waking hours, it's actively filtering, letting through some sensations, blocking others. As you approach sleep, this filtering, called sensory gating, decreases. Your awareness of external sensations becomes less sharp, less focused, but your internal awareness of thoughts, emotions, imagery can become more vivid. This shift from external to internal focus is neurologically measurable and psychologically crucial. You're withdrawing attention from the outer world to attend to the inner world. This is exactly what Jung's active imagination requires. Attention turned inward, focused on psychic content rather than sensory content. Brain chemistry shifts dramatically as you approach sleep, creating the neurochemical environment for transformation. Serotonin, which modulates mood and promotes wakefulness, begins to decrease as you prepare for sleep. Lower serotonin is associated with increased receptivity to unconscious content, to symbolic thinking, to non-rational processing. This is part of why some psychedelic substances which affect serotonin systems can produce experiences similar to hypnagogic states. They're creating similar neurochemical conditions. Melatonin increases as darkness falls and sleep approaches. It's not just a sleep-inducing hormone, it affects consciousness itself. Rising melatonin correlates with decreased analytical thinking and increased dreamlike cognition. The boundary between self and other, between reality and imagination, becomes more permeable. Norepinephrine, associated with stress response and vigilance, decreases. This is crucial for the kind of work Jung describes. You cannot explore your unconscious while your nervous system is in threat mode. The decrease in norepinephrine allows the parasympathetic nervous system to activate, creating the physiological sense of safety necessary for psychological exploration. Acetylcholine fluctuates in complex ways during sleep transitions. It's associated with REM sleep and dreaming, but it's also present in hypnagogic states. Increased acetylcholine correlates with vivid imagery, with a kind of spontaneous visual and symbolic content that Jung engaged in active imagination. GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, increases as you approach sleep. It has a calming effect, reducing neuronal excitability, but it also facilitates a kind of cognitive disinhibition. You become less controlled in your thinking, more willing to follow strange associative paths, more open to content that waking consciousness would reject as irrelevant or inappropriate. This neurochemical recipe decreased serotonin, and norepinephrine increased melatonin, and GABA fluctuating. Acetylcholine creates precisely the conditions Jung describes as necessary for engaging the unconscious. You are calm enough to feel safe, drowsy enough to bypass critical thinking, alert enough to remain conscious of what arises. And here's the crucial part. This chemistry is natural. You don't need substances to create it. Your brain produces this exact neurochemical environment every single night as you fall asleep. Jung's technique simply teaches you to work with this natural state, rather than rushing unconsciously through it. The empirical validation of Jung's approach has accelerated dramatically in the last 20 years. Let's examine key studies that demonstrate the transformative power of work done at sleep's threshold. Michelle Carr and Tore Nielsen at the University of Montreal's Dream and Nightmare Laboratory conducted extensive research on creativity and problem solving during hypnagogic states. They found that participants who were allowed to drift into hypnagogic states before working on creative challenges showed a 250% increase in creative solutions compared to control groups who stayed fully awake. The mechanism they identified reduced cognitive constraints. Your waking mind operates within established patterns, following familiar paths to solutions. The hypnagogic brain makes unexpected connections, combines elements in novel ways, accesses information outside of normal associative networks. This is precisely what Jung meant by accessing the collective unconscious. You're not just thinking your own thoughts anymore. You're accessing broader patterns, archetypal solutions, creative possibilities your conscious mind couldn't generate. Thomas Edison famously used this deliberately. He would sit in a chair holding ball bearings in his hands. As he dozed off, the ball bearings would drop, waking him. But in that brief hypnagogic moment before they fell, he would often get the insights that led to his inventions. Salvador Dali used a similar technique with a key and a plate. These weren't just quirky habits, they were sophisticated uses of the hypnagogic state's creative potential. Robert Stickgold and Matthew Walker at Harvard Medical School have done groundbreaking work on sleep and memory consolidation. Their research shows that the hypnagogic period is an optimal window for learning and memory formation. Information reviewed just before sleep shows significantly better retention than information reviewed hours earlier. but more relevant to Jung's work memories accessed during hypnagogic states, become more integrated with existing knowledge networks. They're not just stored, they're woven into your understanding. This is why active imagination produces not just insights, but integration. You're not just learning new information about yourself, you're reorganizing how you understand yourself. The research on unconscious social cognition by John Bargh at Yale University demonstrates that priming effects exposing someone to information that unconsciously influences their behavior are significantly amplified when the priming occurs during hypnagogic states. The decreased critical faculty means the primed information goes in deeper, affects behavior more powerfully. This has both exciting and concerning implications. Exciting because it means self-directed work at the threshold of sleep can create genuine behavioral change. Concerning because it highlights the vulnerability of this state. You're suggestible, which is powerful when you're directing it toward your own growth, but potentially dangerous if someone else is trying to influence you. Peter Gollwitzer's research at NYU on implementation intentions, the if-then planning strategy, shows dramatically higher success rates when the planning is done at the threshold of sleep. If situation X occurs, then I will do behavior Y becomes more deeply encoded, more automatically activated when formulated during hypnagogic states. This validates Jung's approach of entering the threshold state with an intention or question, then engaging whatever arises. You're not just exploring, aimlessly you're programming your unconscious with new responses, new patterns, new ways of being. Rosalind Cartwright's work at Rush University with depressed patients using dream therapy showed that those who actively engaged dream content during hypnagogic states before sleep showed 40% greater improvement than controls who just received standard therapy. The mechanism she identified emotional processing without the overwhelming charge that prevents integration during full waking consciousness. When you're fully awake and recall a traumatic memory, your amygdala can trigger such intense fear that you shut down, dissociate, or become overwhelmed. But in hypnagogic states, the emotional intensity is present, but somehow more manageable. You can feel the fear while also maintaining some observing distance. This allows the emotion to be processed rather than just re-traumatizing you. Bessel van der Kolk's trauma research at the Trauma Center has incorporated hypnagogic state work, particularly combined with somatic experiencing. He found that PTSD symptoms showed significant reduction when patients learned to access traumatic material at sleep's threshold while maintaining body awareness. The combination of relaxed nervous system, symbolic processing, and body connection allowed traumatic memories to be metabolized in ways that talk therapy alone couldn't achieve. Not everyone responds identically to hypnagogic practice. Understanding individual differences helps you adapt the practice to your particular psychology. The Big Five personality traits show predictable relationships with hypnagogic practice effectiveness. People high in openness to experience tend to find active imagination natural and rewarding. They're already oriented toward inner experience, comfortable with ambiguity, interested in psychological exploration. The challenge for high openness individuals isn't access, but grounding. They can get so absorbed in the inner world that they neglect outer responsibilities. High conscientiousness. Individuals benefit from structured approaches. They need a regular time, a clear method, defined goals. The free-form nature of Jung's original instructions might feel too loose, but when given structure, every night at 10:30, lie down, do a body scan, pose one question, witness for 15 minutes. They excel because they can apply their natural discipline to the practice. Extroverts might initially resist what seems like a solitary internal practice. They're oriented toward external engagement, toward people and activity. But paradoxically, some extroverts discover that hypnagogic work enriches their external relationships. They become more present, more authentic, more capable of genuine connection because they've developed a relationship with their own depths. High agreeableness individuals show heightened suggestibility in hypnagogic states, both an advantage and a risk. They're more open to the unconscious material that arises less defended against difficult truths. But they may also be more vulnerable to negative self-talk, to absorbing critical voices they've internalized from others. They need to cultivate discernment. Is this arising from my authentic self or from introjected criticism? Neuroticism, the tendency toward anxiety and emotional instability, correlates with both the highest potential benefit and the highest risk. People with higher neuroticism often have urgent need for the integration that hypnagogic work provides. Their anxiety and mood issues often stem from unintegrated shadow material. But the intensity of what arises can also be overwhelming. They benefit from starting gradually, perhaps with just 5 minutes, and ensuring they have therapeutic support. Attachment styles originating from early childhood relationships profoundly affect hypnagogic practice. Securely attached individuals tend to approach the practice with trust. They're comfortable with temporary dissolution of ego boundaries because they have internal confidence that they'll return, that they won't be annihilated. This trust allows them to surrender more fully, which paradoxically allows deeper transformation. Anxiously attached individuals may struggle with the surrender aspect. Their entire adaptation has been to maintain hypervigilance about connection, to constantly monitor relationship security. Letting go feels terrifying because their system believes letting go means abandonment. They need explicit reassurance from themselves, from a therapist, if they're working with one, that this temporary dissolution isn't abandonment, but return to the source. Avoidantly attached individuals often have difficulty accessing emotional content in the first place. They've learned to disconnect from feelings, to stay in their heads, to maintain control. The invitation of hypnagogic work to feel, to surrender, to engage the emotional depths contradicts their entire defensive structure. But paradoxically, this might be exactly what they need. The practice can gradually teach them that emotional engagement doesn't destroy them, that they can feel and survive the feeling. Disorganized attachment stemming from frightening or chaotic early environments requires professional guidance. The unconscious may contain genuinely overwhelming material. Without adequate support, hypnagogic work could destabilize rather than integrate. This doesn't mean people with this history should avoid the practice. Some of Jung's most profound work was with highly traumatized individuals. But it means they need a skilled guide, preferably a Jungian analyst or trauma-informed therapist who understands both depth psychology and nervous system regulation. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive persons, HSPs, reveals another relevant dimension. People with high sensory processing sensitivity, about 20% of the population, process stimuli more deeply. In hypnagogic states, this can mean richer imagery, more intense emotions, more vivid symbolic content. But it can also mean overwhelm. HSPs doing this work need to pace themselves carefully, perhaps, with shorter sessions, or with more grounding practices immediately after. Sensation seekers at the other end of the spectrum might find standard hypnagogic practice too subtle, too quiet. They need more intensity to stay engaged. For them, combining hypnagogic work with other practices, breathwork sound, or even carefully structured psychedelic sessions with professional guidance might be more effective. The fundamental insight from all this individual differences research, Jung's technique works, but it must be adapted to your particular psychology. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to engaging the unconscious. You must discover your own relationship with the practice, your own rhythm, your own balance between surrender and control. Perhaps the most important neuroscientific discovery for understanding Jung's technique is the phenomenon of memory reconsolidation, first demonstrated by Karim Nader and later expanded by Oliver Hart and others. Here's what they discovered. When you recall a memory, it doesn't just play back like a video. The memory becomes temporarily unstable, plastic, open to modification. For approximately 6 hours after recall, that memory is in a reconsolidation window where new information can be incorporated before it's stored again in long-term memory. This challenges the common assumption that memories are fixed records of the past. They're not. They're living structures constantly being updated based on new experience and new understanding. Every time you remember something, you have the opportunity to change how that memory is stored. The hypnagogic state creates optimal conditions for productive memory reconsolidation. First, your defenses are lowered so you can actually access memories you normally avoid. Traumatic or shameful memories often can't be recalled in full waking consciousness because the emotional charge is too overwhelming. But in the relaxed, symbolically oriented hypnagogic state, these memories can surface in forms you can tolerate. Second, your brain is in a state that's naturally oriented toward the memory processing. The hippocampus is active, reviewing the day's experiences, integrating them with existing knowledge. You're literally in the brain state designed for memory work. Third, the symbolic and imagistic nature of hypnagogic cognition allows memories to be recontextualized. You might recall a childhood experience not as a literal replay, but as a symbolic scene. This symbolic processing creates emotional distance while maintaining emotional truth. You can work with the memory without being re-traumatized by it. Fourth, in this state, you can bring new understanding adult perspective or compassionate witnessing to old memories. When the memory reconsolidates, it incorporates this new context. Gradually, through repeated work, the memory itself changes. Not the facts, what actually happened, but the meaning, the emotional charge, the impact on your present functioning. This is the neurological basis for why Jung's technique works. You're not just understanding your past differently. You're literally rewiring how your past is stored in your brain. The wounds don't disappear, but their power over you decreases. The patterns don't vanish overnight, but they loosen their grip. The dual process theory developed by Daniel Kahneman provides another framework. He describes System 1, fast automatic unconscious processing, and System 2, slow deliberate conscious reasoning. Most of our functioning happens in System 1. Your deep beliefs, automatic reactions, habitual patterns. These all live in System 1. System 2 can examine these patterns, can recognize they're problematic. But System 2 is slow, effortful, easily exhausted. You can consciously override a System 1 reaction in the moment, but you can't maintain that override indefinitely. To create lasting change, you must change System 1 itself. The hypnagogic state provides access to System 1 precisely because System 2 is powering down. Your automatic processing becomes visible, workable. And because you're in a suggestible state, new patterns introduced here can actually reprogram System 1 in ways that conscious effort during full waking cannot achieve. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory adds another crucial dimension. His research shows that psychological transformation requires the ventral vagal state, a specific nervous system configuration characterized by feelings of safety and social engagement. You cannot do deep psychological work while your nervous system is in threat mode, sympathetic activation, or shutdown mode, dorsal vagal activation. The hypnagogic state, with its decreased norepinephrine and increased GABA, naturally promotes ventral vagal activation. Your body feels safe. This is why the practice must begin with physical relaxation, with creating conditions of safety. Only then can the psyche open to transformation. This also explains why some people struggle with the practice. If your nervous system doesn't feel safe, if you're living in chronic stress, if you're in an unsafe environment, if you have unresolved trauma reaching the hypnagogic state, might trigger anxiety rather than relaxation. The solution isn't to force it, but to first work on nervous system regulation through other means therapy, somatic practices, creating environmental safety. All of this scientific understanding supports Jung's original insight. Transformation happens not through forcing consciousness to change, but through accessing the deeper levels where change naturally occurs. The threshold of sleep provides that access every night. Science now confirms what Jung intuited. This isn't mysticism or wishful thinking. This is how the brain actually works, how memory actually consolidates, how patterns actually shift. The practice of psychology for sleep that Jung developed isn't alternative or fringe. It's neurologically sound, empirically validated, and remarkably effective for those willing to engage it consistently over time. The science doesn't diminish the mystery of transformation. It reveals that transformation itself follows natural laws we're only beginning to understand. Let us now turn from the scientific validation to the psychological challenge. Understanding how this works is one thing. Actually doing it, facing what arises, maintaining the practice, integrating what you discover, that's something else entirely. You've been doing it wrong. Every night for years, maybe decades, you've collapsed into bed, scrolled your phone until your eyes blurred, put on Netflix until your consciousness gave up, or simply worried yourself into exhausted unconsciousness. You call it going to sleep. Jung would call it wasted opportunity. But it's worse than waste. It's active avoidance of the most important appointment of your day, the meeting with everything you've refused to be. Right now, at this moment, There's a part of you who knows this is true, the part that's been waiting at the threshold every single night, the part you've been medicating, entertaining, exhausting into submission. She's been standing at the edge of sleep, and you've rushed past her every single time. Not anymore. Tonight ends the rushing, not because you've learned enough. You could read 100 books about Jung and still be avoiding the actual work. Not because you're ready, nobody's ever ready to face what they've spent a lifetime avoiding, but because something in you has finally heard the call. You've been ignoring the invitation to become who you actually are, rather than who you've been told to be. This section isn't going to be gentle. The first 3 sections of this exploration of psychology for sleep have laid foundations, historical, psychological, scientific. Now comes the part where we stop studying transformation and start confronting the truth about why you're not transforming, about what stands between you and the work Jung describes, about what you'll have to face if you actually commit to this practice. Let me show you something you do every night without realizing it. Pay attention. Around 9 or 10 p.m., maybe earlier, maybe later, depending on your schedule, you start feeling tired. Your body knows it's time to begin the transition towards sleep. This is the beginning of your natural circadian descent, your movement toward the threshold. And what do? You fight it. Not violently, not consciously, but you fight it. You suddenly remember tasks that need doing, emails that must be answered, dishes that can't wait until morning. You find yourself scrolling through social media, watching videos, reading articles, consuming content you don't even care about. Or you have one more drink, one more episode, one more game on your phone. The surface behavior is varied, but the motivation underneath is always the same. You're avoiding the threshold. You're keeping yourself just stimulated enough, just busy enough, just distracted enough, that when sleep finally comes, you collapse past the liminal space, directly into unconsciousness. You never pass through the gateway consciously. You fall off the cliff. Why? What are you running from? Your ego knows what waits at that threshold. It knows that in the liminal space between waking and sleep, your defenses drop. Your carefully maintained self-image becomes fluid. The feelings you've been managing all day bubble up. The thoughts you've been pushing away return. The parts of yourself you've exiled begin knocking at the door. And your ego is terrified because its entire job is to maintain the constructed self, the persona, the acceptable version, the one that's safe, that won't be rejected, that knows how to navigate the world. Dissolution, even temporary dissolution, feels like death, and the ego will do anything to avoid what it perceives as death. So you keep yourself stimulated. You create just enough activation in your nervous system that you can't drop into that threshold state. You exhaust yourself until collapse is the only option. And you call this unwinding, or me time, or my routine. But Jung would recognize it immediately, its resistance. It's the ego's last stand before the nightly dissolution it cannot prevent, but desperately wants to avoid confronting consciously. The self-deception here is exquisite. You genuinely believe you're taking care of yourself. You genuinely think you're being responsible by answering that email, productive, by cleaning the kitchen, relaxed, by watching the show. And on the surface level, maybe you are. But underneath, you're running. you're avoiding the most transformative opportunity of your day. The opportunity to consciously engage the transition between ego and self, between consciousness and unconscious, between who you think you are and who you actually are. Here's the mechanism. Your ego senses the approaching threshold. It recognizes at some level below conscious awareness that the boundaries are about to become permeable. And it knows what's been kept on the other side of those boundaries. The grief you haven't processed, the rage you've been managing, the desire you've been denying the truth. You've been avoiding the authentic self. You've been performing away. If you cross that threshold consciously, if you actually pause there and witness what arises, integration becomes possible. And integration means change. It means the constructed self you've spent years building must die at least a little. It means admitting you've been living inauthentically in some crucial way. It means facing the cost of all that avoidance, all that performance, all that pretending to be who you're not. The ego would rather you stay asleep, metaphorically and literally, than face that reckoning. So it keeps you in the upper room, in the light, in the performance, right up until the moment when your body's need for sleep overcomes your resistance and you simply collapse. You rob yourself of transformation every single night, and you've been doing it so long you don't even notice anymore. This isn't your fault. Before you were old enough to choose, you were being programmed. And the programming runs deep. Since childhood, you've absorbed messages about productivity, achievement, constant activity. Sleep is for the weak. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Time is money. Early bird gets the worm. Rise and grind. The cultural valorization of productivity over depth of doing, over being of measurable achievement, over psychological transformation. You learned that your worth equals your output, that rest is laziness, that stillness is wasted time, that darkness is dangerous and should be banished with light noise distraction. Schools reinforce this, starting at 8 a.m., despite all circadian science showing teenagers need later sleep, rewarding those who stayed up late studying, treating sleep as the unfortunate necessity that interrupts learning rather than recognizing it as when consolidation happens. Workplaces doubled down. The 24/7 availability expectation. The celebration of those who sacrifice sleep for the company. The subtle and not subtle shaming of those who maintain boundaries around rest. The coffee culture that treats perpetual fatigue as normal and natural, rather than as the system's failure. Media and advertising complete the circle. Sleep medications marketed as solutions to the anxiety our lifestyles create. Stimulants to override our natural rhythms. Devices designed to maximize engagement, to keep you scrolling to interrupt any movement toward stillness. And medicine itself particularly. Western medicine often treats sleep as mere biology, dreams as neural noise, the unconscious as primitive brain regions to be controlled by higher cognition. The depth psychological perspective Jung represented has been largely replaced by purely neurochemical models that see symptoms to medicate rather than messages to interpret. Even religion in its Western institutional forms often replaced contemplation with activity, silence with services, individual spiritual experience with collective ritual. The Protestant work ethic baptized productivity as virtue. The dark night of the soul became something to cure rather than something to honor as part of the spiritual journey. Gender conditioning layered additional complexity. Men learned that rest equals weakness, that emotion equals unmanning, that surrender equals defeat. The masculine archetype distorted into perpetual doing, achieving, controlling. Sleep becomes another thing to optimize, to track, to manage, never to surrender into. Women learn that their value comes from service, from meeting others' needs, from maintaining the emotional temperature of every relationship. Rest becomes selfish. Their own needs become negotiable, and the deep inner work that sleep's threshold offers gets perpetually postponed because everyone else's needs come first. Non-binary and gender-fluid individuals often absorb both sets of impossible expectations, creating an even more complex relationship with rest-surrender and the kind of ego dissolution that hypnagogic practice requires. This isn't just cultural background noise. This is active conditioning that shapes your nervous system, your beliefs, your behavior. It creates genuine resistance to the practice Jung describes, because that practice requires you to believe that doing nothing is valuable, that darkness has wisdom, that surrender creates strength, that your psychological transformation matters more than your measurable productivity. Everything you've been taught argues against this. Your entire cultural context rewards staying in the upper room of consciousness, maintaining the performance, keeping busy, staying in control. The system needs you this way. A population that encounters its depths nightly, that integrates its shadow regularly, that listens to its authentic desires, that population can't be easily controlled, manipulated, marketed to. So the cultural programming isn't accidental. It serves the system, and it's killing your potential for transformation. Your nightly avoidance of the threshold isn't personal failure. It's cultural training. You're doing exactly what you've been conditioned to do. Recognizing this doesn't excuse it, but it does remove some of the shame. You're not weak or broken for struggling with this. You're fighting against decades of programming, against an entire cultural system designed to keep you in the shallows. But now you know. And knowing means you can choose differently. You can recognize the resistance not as your true nature, but as conditioned response. You can notice when you're reaching for the phone, or turning on the TV, or finding that urgent task, and you can ask, am I genuinely needing this, or am I avoiding the threshold? That recognition is the beginning of freedom. Not from the cultural conditioning you'll carry that the rest of your life, but freedom to choose something else, something truer, something that serves your becoming rather than the system's needs. Listen carefully, because this is the core of the work. The aspects of yourself you encounter at sleep's threshold. The rage, the grief, the desire, the power, the tenderness, the wildness. These aren't invaders. They're refugees. They're the exiled parts of who you are, waiting at the border every night, hoping you'll finally let them come home. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung wrote, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Look at your life. That job you can't seem to leave even though it's killing you. That relationship pattern you keep repeating. That addiction you can't shake. That achievement you keep chasing that never brings satisfaction. That rage that erupts in inappropriate moments. That depression that returns no matter how many times you try to positive think it away. You think this is fate, bad luck, your inherent brokenness. It's none of those things. It's your unlived shadow, your unintegrated parts, your exiled aspects playing out in the only arena you've given them, your wakened life. What you resist at night controls your days. What you won't meet consciously at the threshold runs your life unconsciously through repetition, through projection, through symptom. Projection is perhaps the most ubiquitous form this takes. Every person you've judged today, the coworker who's too emotional, the friend who's too selfish, the stranger who's too loud, the politician who's too extreme. These are mirrors. You don't recognize it yet, but you will tonight if you stay conscious at the threshold. Because what you condemn in others lives in you. Not identically, not in the same form, but the emotional energy behind your judgment. That's yours. That's the disowned part of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. And it's been standing at the threshold every night, trying to get your attention, hoping you'll reclaim it. The person who's too emotional. You've exiled your own emotionality. You learned somewhere that feeling deeply was dangerous, weak, unacceptable. So you cut it off, pushed it down, created an acceptable version of yourself that's always in control. But that emotionality didn't disappear. You just stopped identifying with it. Now, it appears in others, and you judge them for having what you've lost. The person who's too selfish. You've exiled your own needs, your own desires, your own rights to take up space. You learn that your value came from service, from putting others first, from being the good one who never causes problems. And now, when someone actually prioritizes themselves, your disowned need for the same thing erupts as judgment. At the threshold of sleep tonight, if you stay conscious, these exiled parts will present themselves, not as other people, as themselves, as aspects of you that have been trying to come home. Persona dissolution is what makes this possible. During waking hours, you're so invested in maintaining your self-image that you literally cannot see what contradicts it. The psychological defenses are too strong. But at sleep's threshold, those defenses relax just enough. Who are you without your job title? Without your relationship status? Without your educational credentials? Without your political affiliation? Without your carefully curated social media presence? Without your dietary restrictions? Without the story you tell about who you are? At the threshold, all of that dissolves. And the terror you feel, that's not death, that's birth. You're meeting who you are beneath who you've had to be. There's a voice beneath the voices. You've heard it in dreams, in rare moments of stillness, in crisis, when your constructed self shatters. Jung called it the self, capital S. It's been speaking at the threshold every night, but you've been rushing past so fast you couldn't hear it. Tonight you might finally listen. Not with your thinking mind, you can't think your way to the self, but with your experiencing consciousness, with your capacity to witness what arises without judgment, without control, without the defensive structures that usually protect you from yourself. And here's what you'll discover. The parts you exiled aren't evil. The shadow isn't your enemy. These aspects of yourself were exiled because they were threatening to your family system, to your culture, to your survival as a child. But you're not a child anymore. You don't need those old protections. You need wholeness. And wholeness means reclaiming everything you've disowned. The rage you've been managing. It contains your power, your boundaries, your capacity to say no. The grief you've been avoiding. It contains your depth, your capacity for love, your connection to what matters. The desire you've been denying. It contains your life force, your authentic wanting, your compass toward what's actually yours to do. The tenderness you've been hiding. It contains your humanity, your capacity for genuine connection, your ability to be moved by beauty. The wildness you've been taming. It contains your creativity, your spontaneity, your resistance to soul-killing conformity. These aren't problems to solve. They're parts of yourself to integrate. And the threshold of sleep is where that integration becomes possible, night after night after night, if you're willing to stop running. Here are the real questions, and they're not rhetorical. Tonight at the threshold, you'll answer them not with words, but with your entire being. What would you become if you stopped performing yourself? Who lives underneath the acceptable version? What did you exile to be loved? And what has it cost you? Can you bear to meet who you actually are? When you start this work, when you begin deliberately entering the hypnagogic state with awareness, when you stop running from what arises there, when you commit to this practice of psychology for sleep, things will change. And not in the inspirational, Instagram-worthy ways you might imagine. The social costs are real. People will sense you're different. They won't be able to name what's changed, but they'll feel it. And most won't like it, because you're not performing the way you used to. You're not managing their emotional comfort the way you once did. You're not participating in the collective avoidance anymore. Your tolerance for bullshit, including your own, will vanish. Conversations that used to feel meaningful will suddenly seem hollow. Relationships that were comfortable will become uncomfortable because they were based on mutual avoidance, and you're not avoiding anymore. Some relationships will end, not with drama necessarily, just a quiet recognition that you've outgrown them, or they were never real to begin with. The people who were attracted to your persona will leave when the persona dissolves. The relationships based on your performance will collapse when you stop performing. This is profoundly lonely. The crowd doesn't celebrate those who wake up. They celebrate those who continue sleeping in the same way they're sleeping. Your transformation makes them uncomfortable because it highlights their avoidance. So they'll try to pull you back, or they'll push you away, or they'll simply fade out of your life, and you'll become incomprehensible to who you used to be. You'll look back at your former self and barely recognize them. The things you used to care about will seem trivial. The fears that used to control you will seem absurd. The achievements you were so proud of will seem like elaborate avoidance strategies. The internal struggle is equally demanding. Nights when the threshold terrifies you. When what's trying to emerge is too much too fast, too overwhelming. When you've glimpsed truth and wish you hadn't because ignorance was more comfortable. When you feel yourself fragmenting rather than integrating, and you're not sure if you should push forward or pull back. Mornings when you wake with insights you don't want. When the dream revealed something about yourself that contradicts your preferred narrative. When you recognize a pattern you've been running for decades and you can't unsee it anymore. The vertigo of identity dissolution. That peculiar floating feeling when you no longer identify with who you were, but haven't fully become who you're becoming. When people ask, "How are you?" and you have no idea how to answer because you isn't a fixed thing anymore. When your sense of self is in constant flux because you're actively transforming it, and the resistance that feels like death, because in a very real psychological sense it is. Parts of you are dying. The false self, the constructed persona, the adaptive strategies that kept you safe but kept you small. They don't want to die. They'll fight. And that fight feels like you're fighting yourself because you are. There's no external validation for this work. No one gives you a certificate for shadow integration. Your transformation is invisible to the external world. You can't put it on your resume. You can't post about it on social media. Or rather, you can, but then you're performing transformation rather than actually transforming. You can't prove you're changing. Not to others. Sometimes not even to yourself. Because the deepest changes are qualitative, not quantitative. You don't feel less sad. You feel sad more authentically. You don't feel less afraid. You feel afraid without being controlled by the fear. You don't gain confidence. You lose the need for confidence because you know who you are beneath all performances. The sustained effort required is unlike anything else you've undertaken. This isn't a 21-day challenge. This isn't a weekend workshop. This isn't a book you read and then you're done. Individuation, becoming who you actually are, is the work of a lifetime. The hypnagogic practice Jung teaches is a nightly devotion to that work. Every night, for the rest of your life. There's no graduation. There's no arrival. There's only deeper and deeper truth, which means harder and harder work, which means more and more authentic being. Some nights you'll skip the practice. You'll be too tired, too stressed, too resistant. And that's okay. This isn't about perfection. But you must keep returning because the unconscious doesn't stop working just because you're ignoring it. Your shadow doesn't stop influencing you just because you're not engaging it. The transformation you need doesn't pause just because you take a break. This is the lonely path Jung himself walked. He spent years in what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, doing this work largely in isolation because no one else understood what he was attempting. He came close to psychosis. He frightened his family. He jeopardized his career. But he kept going because the truth mattered more than comfort, more than approval, more than safety. You don't have to risk what Jung risked. He was pioneering territory no one had mapped. You have his map now. You have a century of depth psychology to guide you. But you must still walk the path yourself. No one can do it for you. No guru, no therapist, no book, no technique can substitute for your own descent, your own encounter, your own integration. And here's what makes it hardest. No one will understand what you're doing. Not really. They'll see you lying in bed with your eyes closed and think you're just sleeping. They won't see the inner work. They won't witness the encounter. They won't understand the courage it takes to face yourself night after night. You'll become the only witness to your own transformation. And you must learn to trust that witnessing, to validate your own experience, to know your own truth, even when the entire external world reflects nothing back. This is the loneliness Jung spoke of. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being awake in a sleeping world, of seeing what others don't see, of knowing what others don't know, of being transformed in ways that have no language. no category, no social recognition. But here's what waits on the other side of that loneliness. Internal changes that happen so gradually, you almost don't notice until one day you realize you no longer need external validation to know who you are. You just know. Not with ego certainty, that's false confidence, but with self-knowing, that deep recognition of your own truth that doesn't require anyone else's confirmation. Anxiety decreases not because your life becomes easier, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. The war between who you are and who you think you should be, that war that created most of your anxiety, it ends. Not because you've become who you should be, but because you've stopped believing there's a should be that contradicts who you are. Depression lifts, or at least transforms. Jung recognized that some depression is the psyche's wisdom forcing you to stop living an unlived life. When you actually listen to that wisdom, when you change what needs changing, when you start living as yourself rather than as your adapted self, the depression often dissolves. What remains might be periodic sadness, which is different. Sadness is appropriate response to loss, to beauty, to the human condition. Depression is soul sickness. And the cure isn't medication alone, it's living authentically. You become capable of genuine solitude, which is different from loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of disconnection from others. Solitude is connection with yourself so deep that others' absence doesn't create emptiness. You enjoy company, you value relationship, but you don't need it to feel whole. This might be the greatest gift of this work. You become your own companion. Fear loses its grip. Not because you stop feeling fear, you'll still feel afraid when appropriate. But fear stops controlling you. You've met yourself in the darkness so many times that darkness stops being the unknown. You've died symbolically so often at the threshold of sleep that death itself seems less terrifying. You've faced the worst parts of yourself and survived. What else is there to fear? The compulsions that drove you quietly dissolve. The addiction, the obsessive achievement, the relationship pattern. You couldn't break the behavior you kept repeating, despite knowing better. These were all substitute satisfactions, ego's attempts to fill the hole created by disconnection from self. When you reconnect with self through this practice, the hole fills from within. The compulsions lose their urgency. You still sometimes choose the old behavior, but it's a choice now, not a compulsion. Relational changes emerge that transform how you connect with others. The people you attract shift entirely. You're no longer performing a false self, so you stop attracting people who were drawn to that performance. The relationships that form now are with people attracted to your actual self. These relationships feel fundamentally different, easier, more natural, more real. Existing relationships either deepen or end. The ones based on authentic connection deepen profoundly. You can finally be seen because you're no longer hiding. The ones based on mutual avoidance or performance, they typically end either through conflict or through gentle drifting apart. You can see others clearly for the first time. Without projection, without your shadow material distorting your perception, you can actually see who's in front of you, rather than seeing your own disowned aspects reflected in them. This is both liberation and responsibility. You can't blame others for triggering you when you recognize you're triggering yourself. intimacy becomes possible. Real intimacy, not the pseudo-intimacy of trauma bonding or codependence or mutual ego stroking. Intimacy requires two whole people who can meet without needing to merge, who can connect without losing themselves, who can be vulnerable without being damaged. This kind of intimacy is rare because wholeness is rare. But when you find it, it's transcendent. Conflict decreases dramatically. Most conflict stems from unconscious material, from defending the ego, from projected shadow, from unmet needs you're not even aware of. When you've integrated your shadow, when you know your needs, when you're not defending a false self, most reasons for conflict disappear. What's left is genuine difference of perspective or values, which can be negotiated without drama. Love transforms into something you give from fullness rather than need. Codependence was you needing others to complete you. Real love is you already whole, choosing to share that wholeness with another whole person. The desperation goes away. The grasping goes away. What remains is generous, spacious, genuine, existential changes that reorient your entire relationship to being alive. Meaning emerges from within rather than from achievement. You stop trying to create meaning through accomplishment and start recognizing the inherent meaning in simply being. Your existence itself becomes meaningful, not because of what you do, but because of what you are. You stand rooted in something unshakable. The self that Jung speaks of is not contingent on external circumstance. It doesn't depend on success or failure, praise or criticism, health or illness, wealth or poverty. It simply is. And when you're rooted in that, you weather life's storms with a stability that seems impossible from the outside. Life's events touch you but don't define you. You still feel joy and pain, success and failure, gain and loss. But these experiences move through you like weather, rather than constituting your entire reality. You have a center that remains constant through all changes. Death loses its terror when you've died symbolically hundreds of times at the threshold of sleep, when you've experienced ego dissolution. Repeatedly, death becomes familiar. Not comfortable, that's too strong. But familiar. You know dissolution doesn't mean annihilation. You know letting go doesn't mean disappearing. You know something continues even when the form changes. Your work becomes expression rather than validation. You create. You contribute. You serve not to prove your worth, but to express what's uniquely yours to give. The desperation goes away. The need for recognition goes away. What remains is pure offering. You belong to yourself first. This sounds selfish until you realize that only people who belong to themselves can genuinely belong with others. Everyone else is just using relationship to avoid the terrifying freedom of self-possession. When you own yourself, you can give yourself. When you don't, you can only trade your incompleteness for someone else's incompleteness and call it love. And one day, if you're fortunate, if you stay with this work long enough, you'll meet another person who's done this descent. Not the performance of depth, not the spiritual persona, not the aesthetic darkness, but the real work, the real confrontation, the real integration. You'll recognize each other immediately. Not because you're similar, you're both fully individuated, which means you're utterly distinct, but because you're both whole. And when two whole people meet, something entirely new becomes possible. No game, no strategy, no performance, no need. Just two sovereign beings choosing connection, not from lack, but from fullness. She won't need you to complete her. You won't need her to validate you. The relationship becomes creation, not consumption. Mutual becoming, not mutual using. Two individuals so rooted in their own depths that they can weather any storm together while remaining themselves. This relationship, whether romantic friendship or creative partnership, becomes the outer expression of inner work. It's what's possible when you've done the descent Jung describes, when you've met yourself at the threshold night after night, when you've integrated what you found in the darkness. But first, and this is crucial, first you have to meet yourself every night at the threshold, in the dark, alone. No one can do this for you. No relationship can substitute for it. No achievement can bypass it. No amount of knowledge about Jung's work can replace actually doing the work. The threshold is waiting. It's been waiting your entire life. Tonight and every night for the rest of your